Greetings, greetings, family. We are live. Sister Shanice in the house. Sincere apologies for the delayed start, some technical hitches behind the scenes. But, you know, with perseverance, we are there. So we are live now. And as you can see, we have Dr. Amma Bainy in the house as well. We are getting ready now for day 2 of our symposium. And so family, apologies for the slight delay with the start today. We were having some technical hitches behind the scenes, but spread the word. We are now live on YouTube. Tell your family, tell your friends to go to YouTube. We've got an exceptionally great lineup for you today. So family, those of you who were with us yesterday, you will know that we had an action-packed event, and today is not going to be any different. We are rearing to go. We're just waiting for the families to come into the room. Got some technical challenges, but certainly hoping that that is not getting in the way of us coming live right now. So let me just go over to my phone and see what's happening on YouTube. Let me see if the live button is up. Actually, I can see that the live button is in fact up on YouTube. So once you go to the YouTube channel, it should say 50 years since the passing of Kwame Nkrumah. That is the one that you hit in order to see the show today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go behind stage while things sort themselves out on YouTube. And I'm going to share my screen with you and remind you of the events that we have got coming up. Wow, family. Absolutely phenomenal lineup of events. Let's go over to the share screen now. I've got maybe too many windows open. Why? We've had the computer going slow, but you know, we are getting the show on the road. Right, so it says here we've got 5 remembrance events honouring Osagyefune Kwame Nkrumah, but in fact, we now have 6 events. Yes, we've got 6 events that we are doing. We started yesterday, Saturday the 23rd, today, Sunday the 24th, and we've got another event tomorrow in partnership with the Al-Qaeda Revivalist Movement and speakers. Well, actually, let's just go through. So we are honouring the great Osagyefune Kwame Nkrumah, who said, as far as I'm concerned, I am in the knowledge that death can never extinguish the torch which I have lit in Ghana and Africa. Long after I am dead and gone, the light will continue to burn and born aloof, giving light and guidance to all people. And we are doing that today, family. We're continuing to burn the light. We're continuing to shine the torch for Kwame Nkrumah live on the Sister Shanice Show. We've got our first guest ready and rearing to go, Dr. Amma Bainy. She is an Asian African historian, Caribbean African and American historian as well, and post-independence African policy issues. So she's coming on today, family. Then straight afterwards, we've got Professor de Valeria Wache, and he is a professor of social and cultural history of African and African diasporic people. Tomorrow, great guests lined up for you. So make sure you spread the word. We've got Dr. Jojo Hughes. We've also got Dr. Wendy, who's going to be alongside the Al-Qaeda Revivalist Movement. Then on Tuesday, we've got our Dr. Michael Gimara as well. Great lineup. And the special on Wednesday is a panel debate. Going to be absolutely phenomenal. And then we added to the program for a day 6, an hour ceremony where we are going to rise up the spirit of Osagyefune Kwame Nkrumah. And we've got Omaba Amma Apia, who is the leader of the Asachefu youth movement and team, alongside the spiritual leader of the Al-Kabalan revivalist movement. So there's a lot, family, that you can actually be logging into, and you can join my mailing list as well. So we thank you so much for putting the word out, for letting the family and letting everybody know that we are live. So let me just remove the screen from behind, because, you know, I've got our great guest in the house, and I need to introduce her to you. So let me just bring up her bio as well. So greetings, my Dr. Amma. How are you today?
I'm very well, Sister Shanice. Thank you for inviting me.
It's an absolute privilege and honor. And as you know, there is a great man behind the scenes that has been doing the organizing, and I'm doing my best not to let him down either, and not to let the technicals get in the way. So what I'm going to do, because of time, I'm going to go straight into the introductions by Dr. Bainy, Amma Bainy, and then I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm going to then go behind the scenes and be posting links and doing other things. So, family, we have in the house today the honor of having our beautiful sister, Dr. Amma Bainy. And she has over 25 years of teaching experience in the UK. She has taught courses in African history, that's both ancient and modern, Caribbean history, African American history, post-independence African politics, the history of Pan-Africanism, and the history of Black people in Britain. Her publications include The Political and Social Thought of Kwame Nkrumah, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2011, Speaking Truth to Power, Selected Pan-African Postcards on Tujadeen Abdul Rahim, compiled by Dr. Amma Bainy and Olu Koshi. Apologies for the poor pronunciation. And that was published by Pambazuka Press in 2010. She has served as editor-in-chief of the Pan-African Weekly electronic newsletter, the Pambazuka News, which is a platform for radical debate on African social, economic, and political justice issues, and the African diaspora in the Caribbean and North, South, and Central America. Her current post is a lecturer in Black British history at the University of Liverpool. Her PhD was on Kwame Nkrumah and was called An Intellectual Biography on Kwame Nkrumah. And she did this at the University of London. It was then published into a book entitled The Political and Social Thoughts of Kwame Nkrumah. Without further ado, let me hand over to the platform to our beloved sister, Dr. Amma Bainy.
Thank you very much, Shanice, for that introduction. And I also would like to extend some deep thanks to Elder Adai, Brother Adai, who managed to twist my hand, my arm, at very short notice to do this event. So thank you to Brother Adai.
Yes,
now, I would like to share my screen, which I'm going to try and do now. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, but I'm sure we will do it in just a moment.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and share screen.
I didn't
and actually.
I didn't see share screen. Okay, let me do it now once again. Right.
You can see it now?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent.
Okay.
And I'd also like to echo your thanks and, warmly greet and thank, Achaba, Adesebo, for all the work that he's put in behind the scenes in putting all the wonderful, great speakers together that we're going to have the privilege and honor of hearing from over the next 5 more days of this symposium. Okay, your share screen.
Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yes, we can see the screen now.
Okay, I need to, right.
Let's go into slideshow mode.
Okay, yes.
Good to go.
Can see the screen.
Yes.
Right. So my talk is entitled 50 Years Since Nkrumah's Passing, the Enduring Relevance of His Ideas for the African Continent in the 21st Century. And we're all aware that this week, the 27th of April, will mark 50 years since Kwame Nkrumah passed away in Bucharest, Romania, after contracting prostate cancer. And that's where he died. And he's very much known, globally, and particularly in the diaspora and on the continent, for his passionate demand for African unity and his call for a United States of Africa. This is what most people associate Kwame Nkrumah with, that he was a crusader, an apostle for African unity. He was a champion for Pan-Africanism, and he demanded, continental union government for Africa based on his belief that the resources of Africa, the agricultural and the mineral resources of Africa, should be utilized by the people of Africa rather than benefiting external sources, external people. And I'm going to be using African unity and Pan-Africanism synonymously because I believe they both mean one and the same thing. And this belief in African unity is really core, it's absolutely central to Nkrumah's vision. It dominates his plans for the entire African continent. And he believed that it was necessary for Africa to become an economic and a technological, powerhouse. However, what I want to point out in my presentation is that there were integral aspects or components to his Pan-Africanist vision or to his African unity that I want to dissect. Nkrumah's intellectual legacy was a very rich one, though most people, tend to associate him just as, African unity or a Pan-Africanist. But there were many other strands to his thinking. And most people as well are not aware that out of all of Africa's leaders, he was the most prolific in terms of he wrote 12 books during his lifespan. Which other African leader on the African continent has left 12 books for historical posterity? And his books contain his political ideas that motivated him, that he was, deeply passionate, committed to, and motivated him to act. And what I hope to show in this presentation is that his ideas, or the 7 strands to his ideas that I outline, have continuing relevance for Africans and the African continent today. And I want to analyze those 7 strands, and I've separated them out into the 7 aspects or components to his intellectual legacy, which are, and they're presented here in no order of priority, but the first one is his outlining or belief that neo-colonialism, imperialism, and balkanization are conceptual tools of analysis. 2, conscientism as a philosophy to harmonize Africa's 3 cultural currents. 3, solidarity among the peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. 4, it was his commitment to scientific socialism. 5 was his definition of who is an African. 6 was his opposition to nuclear imperialism and his commitment to non-alignment. And lastly was his call for an African high command. Now, what I intend to do now is look at each of those strands individually. And this first strand, I will spend a bit more time on because it was absolutely essential to Nkrumah's thinking. It formed a major plank, the backbone to Nkrumah's thinking. essentially Nkrumah, he did not coin these terms, i.e. neo-colonialism, imperialism, or balkanization, but he used them to explain what was happening and what had happened on the African continent during the time that he lived. And it's in his book by the title Neo-colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, that was published in 1965, in which he defines neo-colonialism. And he defines it as a system of control in which the African state is indirectly controlled by outside forces, and a tiny minority of Africans are subservient to the interests of the former colonial master, and their interests are aligned with the West. So this is how neo-colonialism operates, through the former colonial masters or powers operating through this tiny elite. And as a result, the riches of the continent are siphoned off into the coffers of Western governments, multinational companies, and the African allies of international imperialism and capitalism. So for Nkrumah, neo-colonialism is a new form of subjugation of the African continent that supplanted the formal departure of the former colonial masters. And it is a mechanism alongside the division, or what he termed balkanization, and imperialist intervention, which fragments the African continent. Now for Nkrumah, neo-colonialism, imperialism, and balkanization were the most important and most dangerous impediments to African unity. And they remain so to this day. In fact, it could be argued that neo-colonialism has become more sophisticated. It operates, more covertly on the African continent since Nkrumah's passing. Now, for example, in 2020, the Economic Development in Africa report estimated that illicit financial flows out of Africa are costing the continent $89 billion annually. And these illicit financial flows manifest in a number of ways. For example, through harmful tax policies and practices in which a minority of unscrupulous Africans collude, through abusive transfer pricing in which prices of goods are inflated, through trade mispricing and misinvoicing, through legal exploitation of natural resources, and through official corruption and organized crime. Now, the Secretary General of the United Nations Council on Trade and African Development, by the name of Mukisa Kituyi, he put it very succinctly when he said that, quote, illicit financial flows rob Africa and its people of their prospects, undermining transparency and accountability and eroding trust in African institutions, end of quote. Another important underbelly of the imperialist order of the 21st century continues to be the way in which aid has been inflicted or encouraged on the African continent since flag independence of Nkrumah's time and since Nkrumah's death. In short, I would argue that the billions of dollars that have been poured into Africa as aid has really not helped Africa to develop nor to industrialize. Instead, aid has deepened Africa's economic subservience, and it has really undermined the psyche of the African to consider him or herself as a perpetual beggar. And often, as we know, this aid is often tied to conditionalities, such as African countries have to import goods from the former colonial master. Or as we have seen, particularly during the 1980s and the 1990s, and even up to this day, the IMF and the World Bank, they come to Africa with loans, with stringent conditionalities, such as African governments have to privatize state enterprises, parastatals, they have to privatize businesses and often devalue their national currencies, all of which, you know, seriously and catastrophically impoverish African economies. And in short, aid is what Nkrumah has aptly described as, quote, the Trojan horses of neo-colonialism. And he goes on to say, aid must be stoutly resisted, for neo-colonialism is a latter-day harpy, a monster which entices its victims with sweet music, end of quote. I believe that Nkrumah's concept of neo-colonialism, balkanization, and imperialism help us to understand the present predicament, the current state of Africa and Africans in the world today. Minority of unscrupulous Africans. Those concepts enable us to understand the positions of Africans and the continent of Africa in the global capitalist economic order. In short, we remain technologically and economically subordinated to the West, to the developed world, and they continue to inflict unfair trading systems and practices on African economies, in which our resources meet very low prices on the world markets. And we continue to be subjected to unfair trade systems of resource extractions, not only by the European Union, Western multinational companies, but also new players who've come to the African continent within the last 10 years, such as the Chinese or the Indians or the Japanese and other foreign powers. In short, whether it's oil, we have no major oil refineries on the African continent, or if it's cocoa, we simply export the cocoa beans and we do not add value to the cocoa. And the manufacturing companies are all based in the West, such as Cadbury's, such as Nestle's, such as the Hershey companies, and so forth. You know, when it comes to our minerals, our manganese, our coltan, our bauxite, and all other precious metals and minerals, they're all extracted for use and manufacture in the West, and then they're all exported back to us. To sum up, neo-colonialism, balkanization, and imperialism continues to operate on the African continent to this day. In short, Africa continues to be in the grip of economic imperialism, and Africa needs to free itself from this condition. To move on now to the second strand in Nkrumah's intellectual legacy, that is conscientism as a philosophy to harmonize Africa's three cultural currents. And Nkrumah identified three cultural currents existing on the African continent. That was traditional Africa, the Euro-Christian current, and the Islamic current, or what the renowned historian and political scientist, Ali Mazrui, aptly coined Africa's triple heritage. To cite Nkrumah from chapter 4 of his book, Conscientism, he writes, practice without thought is blind. Thought without practice is empty. The three segments of African society, which I specified in the last chapter, the traditional, the Western, and the Islamic, coexist uneasily. The principle emanating them are often in conflict with one another. He goes on to say that, quote, our attitude to the Western and Islamic experience must be purposeful. And I emphasize that as African people exposed to Western culture and Western Euro-Christianity and the Islamic experience, we must synthesize these experiences in a purposeful manner, as Nkrumah advocates. He goes on to say that, quote, social revolution must therefore have, standing firmly behind it, an intellectual revolution, a revolution in which our thinking and philosophy are directed towards the redemption of our society. Our philosophy must find its weapons in the environment and living conditions of the African people. It is from those conditions that the intellectual content of our philosophy must be created, end of quote. Now, since Nkrumah's death, in certain parts of the African continent, we have seen, in places such as northern Nigeria, for example, we've seen religious conflict between Muslim communities and Christian communities. Likewise, a similar experience in the Central African Republic. And these conflicts are very detrimental and very destructive to human life. And they often breed long-term hostility that's often passed from one generation to another. Now, as African people, we must find a way to resurrect a peaceful tolerance and harmonization among communities of different spiritual practices that align with a genuine humanism or Ubuntu. If all spiritual practices or religions are genuinely concerned with peace, with love, with kindness for one's fellow human being and a connection to a higher being, then it is the politicization of religion or spiritual practice that brings conflict in order to achieve a malevolent agenda. Africans have to accept that there are differing spiritual faiths, beliefs, and practices, where the traditional African practices that Christians or Muslims may look down upon, but have a legitimate right to coexist along with Christianity and Islam. Moving on, the third aspect of Nkrumah's vision of Pan-Africanism was his belief in solidarity among the peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and other working people of the world, particularly in the developed world. And this is a point Nkrumah made in his Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare that was published in 1968. Nkrumah believed in the principle of unity, solidarity amongst oppressed people around the world, particularly the people of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And he therefore supported at the time the organization known as OSPAL, the Organization of Solidarity for the Peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, which was set up in January 1966 in Havana, Cuba, and was made up of 82 left-leaning organizations during the Tricontinental Conference in Havana. And this was a very important movement that advocated human rights for people of the South and people that were committed to a socialist and communist vision of the world. And it was also an organization that was anti-imperialist in its focus. And since Nkrumah's death, there has emerged, a similar organization in terms of outlook and ethos and ideological outlook, the World Social Forum that was formed in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 2001. It has a very similar ideological vision to OSPAL, despite the contradiction that many of the more wealthy NGOs from the North tend to dominate the forum of the World Social Forum. But overall, Nkrumah strongly believed in the creation of a very different and a very egalitarian world system in which oppressed people all over the world could support each other in their struggles for social and economic justice. And in his book, Class Struggle in Africa, and this was a book that was published posthumously, he provides a very scathing critique of the African petty bourgeoisie, and particularly their alignment to the former imperialist overlords. And what I want to do now is to cite a rather long quote from this book, Class Struggle in Africa, because it captures very poignantly, far more than I can do, the ideas and arguments of Nkrumah. And it also outlines, or it shows Nkrumah's very explicit commitment to socialism and his belief that Pan-Africanism, was a contribution towards the advancement of revolutionary struggle. So this is what Nkrumah wrote in Class Struggle in Africa. He said, quote, "The total liberation and the unification of Africa under an all-African socialist government must be the primary objective of all Black revolutionaries throughout the world. It is an objective which, when achieved, will bring about the fulfillment of the aspirations of Africans and people of African descent everywhere. It will at the same time advance the triumph of the international socialist revolution and the onward progress towards world communism, under which every society is ordered on the principle of, from each according to his/her ability, to each according to his/her needs," end of quote. But to reiterate, Nkrumah was committed to an all-African socialist government for Africa, and he believed that Pan-Africanism would advance the international socialist revolution in which working people around the globe would also be free of economic injustices. And in short, as African people, wherever we are in the world, it's important that we continue to maintain principal links of solidarity with other oppressed groups in the world. And it's also significant that in creating greater South-to-South links of social and economic cooperation, we are also lessening our dependence on the West. And this is very important if African people are to be free. Moving on now to the fourth strand in his intellectual legacy. This was his commitment to scientific socialism. And as previously cited, Nkrumah's vision of Pan-Africanism was socialist. Nkrumah believed that socialism did not belong to any one nation. He believed that socialism was not the possession or was not the monopoly of the Cubans, the Chinese, the Russians, or the Vietnamese. And I think this is an important point for us to revisit and resurrect in our discussions about the future of Pan-Africanism, because so much of the talk about development for Africa is devoid of any mention of socialist economics or the economic development on socialist lines. In short, Nkrumah was of the opinion that capitalism was a vulturistic system. It was an exploitative system that had been exploiting Africa through enslavement, through the slave trade, and then colonialism, which then supplanted slavery. And he believed that in order to combat capitalism, an alternative economic system needed to be centered on economic planning. And Nkrumah's repudiation of capitalism is very much reflected in this book, Towards Colonial Freedom. It was a book that he wrote in 1945, initially as a pamphlet. That was when it was published, and then it later became a book. And his belief that in order to combat capitalism, an alternative economic system needed to be centered on economic planning is critical, very important for Africans today. We need to have planning in terms of within our education systems, within the agricultural sector. We need plans for development of scientific resources. We need plans to control the reinvestment in the continent of the profits made by local and foreign firms on a medium to long-term basis. There is no blueprint for the creation of a socialist economy, and Africa must learn from the errors of other nations who are attempting to create a socialist economy, but Africa must find her own path. At the center of this endeavor must be ordinary African people who drive this initiative forward. Such an economy must seek to generate internal capital from its own agricultural and mineral resources. And in doing so, Africans will eventually disrupt the current capitalist neoliberal order. Why? Because the West cannot continue to exist on the raw materials it gains from Africa at low prices. A socialist economy will guarantee a basic minimum standard of living and pay for all African people. Nkrumah spelled out in his magnus opus, Africa Must Unite, that, quote, "The requirement of continental unity is the essential prerequisite to full industrialization," end of quote. I want to move on now and look at Nkrumah's definition of who is an African, which I argue is a fifth component of his Pan-Africanist vision. And he spelt out this definition in his book, Class Struggle in Africa, in which he stated, quote, "All peoples of African descent, whether they live in North or South America, the Caribbean, or in any other part of the world, are Africans and belong to the African nation," end of quote. I think it's also important for us to revisit this definition 50 years since Nkrumah's passing, because new generations have been born and they need to be instilled with an African sense of identity. And also they need to be instilled with a Pan-African consciousness. They have to have an awareness of the Pan-African past, and that the conditions of Africans around the globe tends to be a pitiful one in our present times. We have only to look around the world at the diasporas of the Chinese or the Vietnamese or the Jews, whose citizenships have been given by their homelands. Yet many Africans in the diaspora do not have the right to return to Africa, as the Jews have a right to return to Israel. Now, in 2010, when our sister nation, Haiti, faced the terrible devastation of an earthquake, it was the Senegalese president at the time, Abdoulaye Wade, who then invited Haitians to relocate to Senegal. And this was a very noble and commendable Pan-African act, a Pan-African call. And in short, the possibility of a continental citizenship for diasporan Africans was integral to Nkrumah's Pan-Africanist ambitions. Nkrumah believed, quote, "Africa is one continent, one people, and one nation," end of quote. My colleague Olufemi Taiwo puts it very succinctly when he says or writes, quote, "African countries need the equivalent of the law of return in Israel that guarantees every Jew or whatever color a home in Israel. If little Israel can do it, why can't the whole continent of Africa?" End of quote. Now, Ghana has made some attempts in terms of the right to return law for the descendants of the enslaved Africans to have dual citizenship. But Ghana is only one country or one nation state in a continent of 55 African countries who need to take up this law of return for all Africans. So other African countries need to follow suit. But I would advance this further and argue that African countries need to cultivate a Pan-African citizenship. Why? This Pan-African citizenship, I believe, is essential to combat, to counter the Afrophobia and xenophobia that we've seen arise in South Africa, particularly from 2008 onwards and since, whereby Somali nationals, Mozambique nationals, and other African nationals have been killed, have been under attack by Black South Africans. And elsewhere on the continent, we saw in the 2000s in Côte d'Ivoire, another very ugly concept of ivorité emerge, whereby some Ivorians had to prove their Ivorian citizenship. These two developments in Côte d'Ivoire and South Africa, are very negative developments, I would argue, and they seriously undermine the struggle for Pan-Africanism. An antidote is the cultivation of a Pan-African citizenship, which would mean that all people, regardless of where they were born on the African continent, they would have the right to work, live, reside. They would have dignity wherever they were to reside, to live on the African continent. And to foster this, I believe the media, religious groups have a very huge role to play in dispelling negative myths and stereotypes and creating understanding among African communities. Moving on to the sixth strand, this is his opposition to nuclear imperialism and commitment to non-alignment. Throughout the 1960s, Nkrumah was a staunch defender of the policy of non-alignment or positive neutrality. However, I must say in the latter part of Nkrumah's life, whilst he was living in Guinea-Conakry, he abandoned his belief in non-alignment and also in the Organization of African Unity, but that's another story. But to understand this position of non-alignment, we have to remember that the 1950s and the 1960s was a period of the Cold War, a time of very deep hostility between Russia and the United States of America. And these two superpowers held very opposing, ideologically opposing concepts of the world, economic systems, Russia believing in communism, a socialist system, and the United States of America advocating, supporting capitalism. And the newly emerging nation states that were shedding their colonial tutelage, they became caught up in this entanglement of the Cold War and the Cold War superpowers. And they tried to maneuver this Cold War scenario. And the antidote or solution they came up with was the position of non-alignment. That is, they were neither pro-West nor pro-East. And they would also refrain from allowing the superpowers to put soldiers or to place bases and troops on their soil. Hence, they would not align to Russia nor the West. However, in reality, navigating the Cold War was very difficult and very complex. But Nkrumah championed positive neutrality or non-alignment, and he maintained fraternal relations with both the East and the West, with Russia and America, or he tried to, despite the suspicions and the paranoia of the West, and despite the fact that he was very much maligned as being communist and under the control of the Russians by the imperialists. Now, as part of Nkrumah's commitment to a unified Africa, free from the predations of imperialist and interventionist forces, Nkrumah was opposed to what he termed nuclear imperialism, end of quote. And he condemned the French explosion of the atomic bomb in the Sahara in February 1960. And he categorized the French action as one of, quote, atomic arrogance. And here on the screen, you can see a photograph of officials who were overseeing the atomic bomb tests in Algeria. Algeria was controlled in 1960 by France until 2 years later, the Algerians freed themselves from French control. In our current times, whilst the Cold War has ended, though some may argue it is currently being reignited with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the West's stance on Putin, some have argued that a multipolar world now exists. China has emerged as an economic force in the world. There are the BRICS, known as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And in Latin America, there is ALBA. But today, it is still difficult for Africans in international fora such as the United Nations and in meetings with the Chinese or in negotiations with India, Japan, or the EU to speak with one voice. We are often divided, yet we must learn to enter such platforms united in presenting our interests as Africans. Too often, to our detriment, we enter negotiations on a bilateral basis. That is, each individual nation state negotiates individually with either the EU or with the Chinese or with India. And again, it's divide and rule, but in a different configuration. We need to enter such platforms, such forums, as a regional bloc, either as ECOWAS or COMESA or SADC. Essentially, our Pan-Africanist vision and ambitions must guide our negotiations with other people and countries in the world in order to secure our Pan-Africanist interests. In our present world, Africa must consistently align with their own self-interests. That must be the guiding focus. So far, I've analysed 6 important components to Nkrumah's Pan-Africanist vision of union government for Africa. A 7th strand to that vision was his call for an African high command. In the final chapter of Africa Must Unite, Nkrumah outlines that, quote, the political and economic unification of the African continent should seek 3 objectives. And for Nkrumah, these 3 objectives for Africa was, firstly, he says, we should have an overall economic planning on a continental basis. This would increase the industrial and economic power of Africa, so long as we remain balkanized regionally or territorially, we will be at the mercy of colonialism and imperialism. He goes on to say that secondly, we should aim at the establishment of a unified military and defense. And thirdly, he calls for a unified foreign policy and diplomacy. And it's to the calls of a unified military and defense strategy that I wish to turn our attention to, because Nkrumah envisaged that this form of an African high command, that is a military force made up of African troops from several African countries, this force would defend the interests of Africa and would be controlled by Africans. In 1963, Nkrumah prophetically wrote, and I quote him here, if we do not unite and combine our military resources for common defense, the individual states, out of a sense of insecurity, may be drawn into making defense pacts with foreign powers, which may endanger the security of us all. Now, 50 years since the passing of Nkrumah, we have seen all manner of neo-colonial African governments allow Western troops and bases on African soil. In short, Nkrumah's words have come to pass. Nkrumah was a political prophet in a very secular sense, and he must be convulsing in his grave at the fact that in 2007, under the leadership of George Bush Jr., an AFRICOM, an Africa Command, was set up under the initiative of the United States of Aggression, the USA, under George Bush's leadership. And AFRICOM is an anathema to the interests of African and the African continent. You know, we should be under no illusion that it is there to protect our interests. It is there to protect, you know, American interests and American ambitions to protect oil in the region of Nigeria, and also to protect the Red Sea strategic region across into the Gulf states. And therefore, it has, America that is, has troops stationed in Djibouti as part of AFRICOM. So AFRICOM, though it claims to be, you know, set up under the fig leaf of counterterrorism activities, was really set up to secure American interests and securing American interests in African oil exports. Djibouti is not the only African country that has allowed foreign interests onto its terrain. In 2013, the Mali government under President Diokonde Traoré invited the French to come into Mali to help, ostensibly, the Malian government put down an insurgency in the north of the country. There are too numerous examples to cite since the passing of Nkrumah of the predations, the maneuverings and activities of neo-colonial governments in collusion with the West in terms of allowing Western interests and former colonial powers to maintain military ties with African governments. Kenya is one such country. Since 1963, since the formal independence of Kenya, Kenya has maintained military ties with Britain. And Britain sends about 10,000 British troops every year to conduct joint military training exercises with the Kenyan army. As Nkrumah points out in Africa Must Unite, the fact that each of the 55 African nation states, each has its own army, is a profound waste of economic and financial resources. And these resources could be used, you know, diverted to build more schools, to build more hospitals, to build more roads, to build social services for African people with disabilities. There are all manner of economic and social services provisions that could, this money that's utilized on military defense that each individual nation state devotes to could be utilized for. But if Africans pool their resources on the military and economic front, you know, harness these resources, the potential for what we could achieve would be much greater and be in the benefit of our people. But instead, each individual African nation state prefers to have their own, you know, tin pot army in order to support a tin pot dictator. And these armies are often used to repress African people and to kill African citizens. Now, to conclude, Pan-Africanism remains a critical project that Africans must mobilize to realize. It is a long-term project in which Africans must be at the center of constructing. Pan-Africanism or African unity cannot only be a top-down or a state-led or a state-imposed project. Pan-Africanism has to be built from the ground up. And it must connect village to village, town to town. It must connect trade unions across the African continent. Pan-Africanism has to be built at various levels. Creating a Pan-African consciousness of the importance of unity must be at the center of the project for Pan-Africanism. Unity will ensure that our resources are used for the benefit of African people. And unity will ensure that we are respected in the world when we are an economic and a technological powerhouse to be reckoned with. Therefore, 50 years since the tragic death of Nkrumah, and I remind people that Nkrumah was only 63 years old when he passed away. 50 years since his passing, there is an enduring relevance of his ideas, and particularly his ideas on African unity. We must critically apply his ideas and critically think about the relevance of his ideas for our current times. That is the challenge for the new generation of African youth on the continent today and in the diaspora, and for all African people. I thank you all for listening.
We thank you too. Oh, wow. Dr. Amma Bainy, thank you so much for that first-class presentation on the views of Kwame Nkrumah and those 6 strands of his vision for Africa and Africans around the world. Absolutely agree with you. It is so relevant. His vision, he was a prophet during his times. He was a visionary. Oh my gosh, he could just see, you know, into the future based on those writings there. It's chilling the extent to which so much of what he had to say has actually come to pass. Now, I know you've got to run off very soon, but there have been so many comments in the chat while you have been speaking, points, questions, people just agreeing with what you're saying. Someone said, you're just hitting on all cylinders. Do you have any time maybe to hear some of the comments or respond to some questions, if there are any, before you run off, Dr. Amma?
Yes, I've got 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, excellent. And we also, I can see we have waiting in the wings, Professor Dal Verreira Wache, who is the next speaker coming up. So we will be bringing you in after Dr. Amma. So thank you so much, Dr. Wache, for waiting in the wings. If you just put your video align through your video for now, and we'll just deal with Dr. Amma. Thank you so much, and then we will be bringing you back in. And if you can find some lighting as well while you're in the background there, that would be absolutely fantastic. Okay, let's go over to our audience in YouTube. Thank you so much, everyone in the audience, for all of your comments and points. Let me just randomly go in now and bring out some of the conversation that's been happening. So welcome, everybody in the chat. Thank you so much for engaging. Shaka says, people in the Middle East do not pay taxes, but live very well. They have healthcare. They pay fair rates for water, electric, gas, etc. This is what Nkrumah wanted for Ghana. It's what he wanted for Ghana and the whole of Africa. And Dr. Amma talked about the importance of Africa having its own vision, its own economic policies, and doing for self, and, you know, just as the Middle East have done. Dr. Amma, is this, you know, what you think Kwame Nkrumah wanted for Africa? You know, fair rates, fair access to resources, you know, similar to what people in the Middle East are able to benefit from, because maybe they have more control over their resources?
Yes, indeed. I don't think Nkrumah made a direct comparison with, you know, the Middle East, but he certainly wanted African people, the majority of African citizens, to benefit from the resources. Take, for example, Nkrumah's vision for Ghana. As he rightly said on the eve of Ghana's independence, the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless linked to the total liberation of Africa. And integral to that vision was his belief in the construction of the Akosombo Dam for hydroelectric power. And in Nkrumah's vision, that dam was not just for the benefit of Ghanaians, it was in his bigger scheme of things for the West African region. You know, was to benefit Ghana's neighbors, Burkina Faso, Togo, Nigeria. Now, what is very shameful is that 50 years since the demise of Kwame Nkrumah, you know, Nkrumah's detractors and enemies and the subsequent military and civilian leaders, none of them, in terms of the successors to Nkrumah, none of them have sought to build on the capacity of the Akosombo Dam. You know, none of them have sought to expand the hydroelectric power of Ghana. So subsequently, in the last 3 to 4 years, Ghanaians have suffered, terribly from the phenomenon known as dumso, that is light off, energy crisis, lack of power. So you can't power up your computer, or you can't, use electrical goods. And this has affected Ghanaian citizens, particularly those who do not have the means to have a generator, attached to their house. The well-to-do, the elite of Ghana can do that. But my point is that none of Nkrumah's subsequent successors, if they had the country genuinely, the economic interests of Ghana genuinely at heart, they would have built on the capacity, they would have expanded the capacity of the Akosombo Dam, because since then, the population of Ghana has outstripped the capacity of the dam to cope with the current demographics of the country. But yet each African Ghanaian leader, rather, has tended to neglect this very important, fact that, energy, industrialization of Ghana and electricity is fundamental to that vision. So yes, Nkrumah, wanted Ghana and the whole of Africa to benefit from its resources in terms of good infrastructure, in terms of employment, in terms of education, universities, schools and clinics. So yes, Nkrumah, set up the basis of this in a foundational welfare state, but the coup, unfortunately, cut him down and stopped him in his tracks of attaining these plans.
Thank you so much for that response. There seems to have been a bit of a discussion in the chat about Marxism, socialism, Pan-Africanism. I wonder if you could just home in for a little while and tell us the difference between socialism and Pan-Africanism, because on one hand, Kwame Nkrumah was a Pan-Africanist, but in terms of his economic policies, he was very much, you might say, a socialist. It's been suggested in the chat that we shouldn't be confusing the two. They're very different. I wonder if you could just briefly separate the two for us, so that we have, I don't know if you can do that in 5 minutes.
Yes, exactly. So much has been written on these two subjects in terms of Pan-Africanism and socialism. But essentially, Pan-Africanism is a movement of people, of organizations. It's an ideology, a thinking, a belief that all people of African descent, whether on the continent or in the diaspora, are connected by history as a result of enslavement, colonialism and imperialism, racial exploitation and racism. That wherever we are in the world, as Marcus Garvey saw when he traveled around Central America, African people of mine or your skin color seem to be at the bottom of the social ladder and in the most menial jobs and despised globally. Pan-Africanism is a movement to attain the liberation, economic, social and racial liberation and dignity of African people. And socialism is a system, an economic system and a political system based on ordinary people controlling the resources, the economic resources upon which their lives are built upon. So the land is critical, and ownership of the land and planning utilization of the resources in a society is how socialism organizes itself. So socialism is an economic system. It's also an ethical system in terms of principles and values based on cooperation, based on justice, based on fairness, based on freedom, based on individual and collective rights and responsibilities. And these principles and the socialist system, as Nkrumah says, the traditional African societies of communalism had values that are sympathetic and cohere with socialism. And therefore socialism for Nkrumah was a more desirable system for Africans to live under, since in traditional African societies, we operated under values and principles and ethics of fairness, interdependence, People will collectively farm together and share resources together, work together. You know, these are the values and principles of socialism that need to be resurrected in a modern form, need to be reconfigured in a modern form. And it's for ordinary people to work out, to plan, to build, construct, you know, a collectivist. If people are uncomfortable with the term socialism, another term is collectivism, that we work together. Socialism and collectivism are about people, communities, societies working together, deciding what their interests are, deciding how to organize to feed themselves, to be self-reliant upon the resources and the environment that they find themselves in. Now, in 2 minutes, I've tried to sum up what many people have, written volumes on in terms of Pan-Africanism and socialism and Marxism.
You've done it brilliantly. Oh, thank you so much. I hope everyone in the chat, is much clearer now. I certainly am as well. Thank you so much for that. And it's also been suggested, this may be the last one because of your time, in the chat, that most African leaders seem to have a pro-Western capitalist view. And and as you said as well, Kwame Nkrumah, said throughout his work, capitalism is based on corruption, exploitation. It destroys countries, but yet, so many African leaders seem to want to embrace capitalism for their African nations. If we're going to be planning, as you suggested, we ought to be, and as Kwame Nkrumah is advising us to be, and so right in his vision for Africa, because he laid the blueprint or the blackprint, the foundations as well on what we ought to be doing. How are we going to go forward as Africans, working towards this collectivism, socialist kind of economic strategy when we've got leaders who are so pro-capitalist? How do we unlock this kind of dichotomy in order to be able to move Africa forward in that fair and equitable and just way that you've described that socialism will bring with it?
Yes, it's a formidable challenge. The mindset of the present neo-colonial incumbent leaders is very much wedded to neoliberal capitalist principles and, the market economy. So it requires a new generation of African leaders, perhaps, not in my lifetime, our children's lifetime, to transform that mentality, that mindset. But that aside, there are things that African people can do on the ground, whether they are farmers, in cooperatives or in businesses. They can begin to create, more egalitarian economic systems and ways of living on the ground, from the bottom up. It doesn't need, it shouldn't require people to be told, how to do things. So we have to be innovative. As the great Thomas Sankara once said, we must dare to invent the future. It takes, as Thomas Sankara said, it takes mad men and women to do something different, to think outside of the box, to be imaginative. But it is for the workers, the farmers, the peasants, of Africa to think of more cooperative structures, more collective ways of working together in which they benefit from, economically. That is, my belief in which, socialism or collectivism, more people-orientated economic systems that benefit people rather than a tiny elite of capitalists or people who siphon off the wealth in societies, that, these new structures and new arrangements have to come from the people.
Yes, indeed. So there's so much that we could be doing as a people to bring about the changes that we want to see. And, you talked about the village life, how people would ordinarily live, in their kind of collective communities. And it's building on that and advancing on that from the sounds of it. Wow. Absolutely phenomenal presentation. There's been so many compliments for you in the chat, Sister Dr. Bainy. So many people have been complimenting your presentation. Absolutely phenomenal. Apologies that we had the technical hitches at the beginning there, why we went over, and apologies also to the next speaker coming up that we're a little bit late. Because of the technical hitches at the beginning. But let me allow you to leave the audience and those watching with some closing remarks or some closing thoughts. Doctor.
Well, my closing thoughts are that we need to resurrect, we need to talk about, our Pan-African history, in terms of our leaders and peoples and communities that have struggled for Pan-Africanism. We need to have an awareness of a Pan-African history. And we need to, as people committed to Pan-Africanism, we need to educate other people about the necessity for African unity in the 21st century. What does Pan-Africanism look like now in the future? How can we build Pan-Africanism? This needs to be discussed amongst ordinary people to counter the ignorance, to deepen understanding, to bring people, who are naysayers, who are sitting on the fence, who are dubious about Pan-Africanism, to bring them on board. We may not bring everybody on board, but we need, a critical mass of African people, future generations of African people, to concretize Pan-Africanism, to make it real. Those are my last words to the audience. It's to Africa's youth generation who will make Pan-Africanism real, who will live it, who will experience it, who will benefit from it. It may not be my generation, it may be 2 or 3 generations away, but we all have a contribution to make in order to make it happen. Just as Nkrumah, made a contribution, that he has passed on the baton, so we must do likewise.
Thank you so much for a brilliant presentation and talk today, Dr. Bainy. It's been an absolute pleasure, privilege and honor. And I just want to thank also our elder, Chiapa Adesebo, for managing to twist your arm so that you could present to us today. That has just been so educative and informative. Thank you so much. We'll be watching back this video over and over again and learning from it. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we hope that you will in the future revisit us again, because as you quite rightly say, we've got to bring on the next generation and deepen their knowledge and understanding of what Pan-Africanism is all about, because they're not learning it in schools, colleges and universities. So it's our job somehow to set up those teaching schools and venues within the community, or online teaching as we're doing now, so that we can reach the next generation with the knowledge and information they need in order to go forward and build. Thank you so much. More love.
Thank you. Okay, I will ask, as in the saying Ghana, I'll ask for permission to leave. And I hope the next half goes brilliantly well.
Thank you so much. Yes, permission to leave granted.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We have our elder listening in the background as well. Just want to acknowledge you, our beautiful elder, Chiapa Adesebo. We love you so much for the works that you're doing. We do have our next presenter in the house, family. I wonder if our Dr. Professor De Valera Wache can put his camera on for us. Oh, absolutely fantastic. Yes, we can see you now. Professor De Valera Wache, welcome to the second day of the Osajefi Kwame Nkrumah Symposium. And how are you today, Professor?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate the invitation. I know that I'm doing for a noble cause. And I also like to give thanks to my elder, Ucheba Adaisebo, for, letting me know this light and to put myself into it. This discussion is really important. We need to have this discussion at this particular time in history.
Absolutely. And we thank you so, so much for accepting the presentation, accepting the offer to deliver a presentation to us today, because, you know, as you quite rightly say, I agree, it's so important for us to be having this conversation. It's so important for us to be remembering the vision, the works of Kwame Nkrumah. You know, he did the works, he wrote the books. I mean, I just didn't realize he'd written so many books. Until our sister Amma Bainy actually pointed out 12 books he's written. And I would expect those 12 books to be the books that all students in Ghana are actually studying. Well, in fact, let's go over to your presentation now, can we, Professor? Because you are a professor of history. You focus on social and cultural history of African and African diasporic people. You are also the head of the history department at the University of Cape Coast, and you're a strong supporter of Pan-Africanism. So we look forward to your presentation. Let's go straight over to you now, and we'll engage in some interaction with you after your presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, sister. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all the people who have made time to listen and tune into this show. It's an honor to be before you. My talk basically is about Nkrumah, but how academia has reacted to Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana since the 1960s. So the topic is Nkrumah and self-censorship in Ghanaian academia. So I intend to look at the phenomenon and situation of what I call the taboo, or the censorship that has been made of the ideas and intellectual products of Kwame Nkrumah, particularly his books. And you did talk about books of Nkrumah being a must read, but is that the case? Well, as I progress, we'll know. So this taboo and censorship that, you know, the academia have made about Nkrumah's book since the 1960s. You know, I find it strange and disheartening that there has been an acknowledgement of the world that Nkrumah was a great thinker and original in his thoughts about Africa and how Africa should navigate the challenges of the post-colonial period, or the neo-colonial period as it is. But Ghana's academia and the curriculum in the school system has not been very friendly and open to being or bringing this consciousness of Nkrumah to most of the students in the school systems. His ideas have not been studied and has not been inserted in the national consciousness of the Ghanaian youth through the school system. Well, Nkrumah has been acknowledged even by the BBC, you know, a mouthpiece, a media house that is not very friendly to Nkrumah, since has not been very friendly, has acknowledged Nkrumah as the man of the millennium. This is the man of the millennium. And so he's not just any human being who has no worth. He is valuable, and his ideas are very priceless, and these ideas must be studied. The Western world has centered or has made it important to study some of their philosophers and to use their knowledge to guide their civilization and progress. Example, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Marx, Adam Smith, etc. These have also been made to be studied in different degrees by the colonial peoples and the post-colonial, neo-colonial peoples in their schools. So in the Ghanaian schools and Ghanaian academy, you find, you know, the philosophies of Western scholars being made, you know, part of the things that the students have to study through mathematics, through political science, history, philosophy, and classics. But Nkrumah's ideas for Pan-Africanism, decolonization, economic progress, education, formation of the African personality and African genius, the African defense, have not been democratized for public and school consumption. These are only taught as appendages in certain courses. The question is why? It's because reactionary forces have always seen his ideas as a threat to their imperial and colonial agenda, and they have continued to oppose his ideas. But when did this start? When did this start? The Ghanaian academia, a large portion of it, were reactionary and still had this colonial mentality, what I refer to as the colonial epistemological hangover. There was also envy and jealousy, I will say, that many had about Nkrumah's intellectual verve and advancement. In fact, Nkrumah during his day saw this and commented about it. In 1959, Nkrumah stated that, and I quote, "With a few exceptions, University College, which is now the University of Ghana, which is the first university to be established in the Gold Coast," he said, "was becoming a breeding ground for unpatriotic and anti-government elements." He added, "We want the University College to cease being an alien institution and take on the character of a Ghanaian university, loyally serving the interests of the nation and well-being of our people." This can be found in the book, The Noble Task of Teaching, published in 1961. Nkrumah hit the raw nerves of reactionary academics, and when he disclosed that reforms and changes of this reactionary attitude in academia must end, he said, "If reforms do not come from within, we intend to impose it from outside, and no resort to the cry of academic freedom. For academic freedom does not mean irresponsibility. It's going to restrain us from seeing that our university is a healthy university devoted to Ghanaian interest." This can also be found in the same book that I quoted, The Noble Task of Teaching, 1961. In 1963, after having a dinner with some academics, he said that the university in Ghana must not exist as if it was in a vacuum. It must exist in the context of society, a society which sustains it. He mentioned that he was ready to defend it all the time, as long as the university and those who worked in the university worked with honesty and objectivity. This can be found in the book, The Role of Universities, published in 1963. He added that there is a tendency to use the words academic freedom to assert the claim that a university is more or less an institution of learning, having no respect or allegiance to the community or country in which it exists or purpose to serve. This assertion is unsound in principle and objectionable in practice. The university has a clear duty to the community which maintains it and which has the right to expect concern for its pressing needs. Also in the book that I quoted early on. Although Nkrumah has sought to change the colonial mentality of many through the academia, many academics still held on to this mentality. It was because of this quest by Nkrumah that the UCC, my university, University of Cape Coast, was established. And when the university was being outdoored or being opened, the sword was being cut, Nkrumah wasn't present, but his able lieutenant, Bochio, came and did the sword cutting. And he said, on behalf of Nkrumah, he said that the university was to aim at the enlightenment and upliftment of our people, and at wiping out the legacy of illiteracy, miseducation, superstition, distortion, and false values, which clearly was a critiquing of the colonial education of the colonial exploiters. Often we say colonial masters, but I would like to say colonial exploiters in this particular context. So that was what Nkrumah wanted the African university to become. And he did set up the University of Cape Coast to spearhead that drive, because of course, the first university that was established in the country was established by the colonial exploiters. So Nkrumah came in and wanted the University of Cape Coast to be the African university. In fact, Nkrumah said that the role of the university and academics is to kindle national interest in the youth and uplift our citizens and free them from ignorance, superstition. And may I add, this is what he said. He said, indolence. Also in the book, The Role of the University, published in 1963. Nkrumah was therefore intimidating many academics. Now, how did he intimidate them? He basically intimidated them by asking them to move away from the colonial mentality. The colonial mentality that supported capitalist ways of exploitation, tribalism, and also in a way supported this inferiority complex that many had internalized. It was in the light of this that he also set up the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. And also out of that came this African Studies program that many universities or many tertiary education institutions in the country came to adopt. But Nkrumah did anger a number of academics. His establishment of educational institutions to provide complementary education was not welcomed by many academics. For example, the Young Pioneer Movement and the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. Now, the propagandists or the propaganda of the opponents of Nkrumah and his anti-neo-colonialism and anti-colonial mentality drive continue to discredit Nkrumah. A book written by Nkrumah, Neo-colonialism, Last Day of Imperialism, was demonized by some political academics who even paraded that book before imperialist agents in the West as a very dangerous book containing dangerous ideas of Nkrumah, and therefore the need for the West to do everything to thwart the efforts of Kwame Nkrumah at nation building. Nkrumah made a lot of enemies among the academia. They continued their anti-Nkrumah sentiments in their small cliques and international networks, and continued to feed some of the young ones that sat under their feet with anti-Nkrumah ideas. Academics, for example, K.A. Buzia and Ali Mazrui wrote to discredit Nkrumah. For example, Ali Mazrui wrote a work in 1966 called Nkrumah, titled Nkrumah, the Leninist Tsar, in which he tried to ridicule Nkrumah and also to say that Nkrumah wanted to be an African Lenin. However, his limited intellectual talents were bound to make him an inferior carbon copy of Lenin. The opposition to Nkrumah continued in academia. Now, with the overthrow of Nkrumah, the national consciousness was anesthetized, and a certain induced amnesia came to it about Nkrumah's intellectual products and their usefulness to nation building. The coup makers and their associates in academia decided to de-Nkrumanize Ghana, even in the area of knowledge production and consumption. They committed a great sin that we often do not talk about. A great sin which in European history occurred during the Nazi outburst by the burning of books in Germany to purge the nation of unhealthy ideas. That is considered a great sin in European modern history. In Ghana, it did happen. Ghana witnessed the burning of Nkrumah's books and literature that were deemed to be dangerous to Ghanaians. And it was about wiping out Nkrumah's thoughts and ideas from the Ghanaian scene. This sin, which is a cultural, academic, and intellectual sin, as I said, was aimed at wiping Nkrumah's ideas. And the propagandists did this without any regrets whatsoever. Now, many of them did say that Nkrumah's ideas were atheistic and were anti-African. And therefore, his books, which were socialist and Marxist, had to be removed, and his ideas had to be removed. So by burning the books, they literally and symbolically made a gesture to Ghanaians, that they were removing Nkrumah's ideas and Nkrumah from their psyche. Nkrumah's very person, photographs, even the TPP party, were purged and proscribed. The pearls of Nkrumah's thoughts were not to be taught to the younger generation. His books were banned in Ghana. So the curriculum of the academia had most of its writers not focusing on Nkrumah's thoughts through the years after Nkrumah. And it is important for us to know that these ideas that Nkrumah really created through a dint of hard work, through his own personal experience, by reading other great thinkers from the diaspora, including Marcus Garvey and Du Bois, are still very relevant to us today, to the African Revolution. And it's important for us to revive them. Bourgeois academicians will not accept this, because to them, it is something that goes contrary or goes against their colonial mentality. Many of them continue to talk about Nkrumah and describe him as a dictator, to the point that recently, when there was the writing of a new curriculum and therefore the production of textbooks to teach students, even at the primary level, some writers decided to describe Nkrumah in the textbooks as a dictator. And this really incensed many conscious African Ghanaians who spoke against that label. Well, that textbook was called from the shelves, and I don't know what has happened to it, but it's no longer in the market. We have to understand that the Osagifus thoughts are very much alive and important. The Osagyefo is not just an Osagyefo because he wanted to be called Osagyefo. People looked at him and decided that they will call him Osagyefo because of his works. Osagyefo meaning a redeemer, a messiah, a savior. And in fact, in one of the newspapers, the evening news, it was written by the CPP writers at the time that the title Messiah is something that all of us can carry. It is only to be given to a person who does something to another, a good deed to another person. Any good deed that elevates another person is the deed of a Messiah. And therefore, it's important for us to understand that all of us, Marx, Lenin, Gandhi, Nkrumah, even those who subscribe to the religion called Christianity, mentioning Jesus, we have to understand that we can all become messiahs. And this was, in fact, what Nkrumah wanted all of us to become. So many of us will read books called holy books, written by Bronze Age people, and use those books to guide themselves, written for more than 2,000 years, and use those books to guide themselves today, guide the economic activities, guide their political activities, guide the cultural activities, family activities, but will not take a look at Kwame Nkrumah's books, written just some few years ago, written as a result of a person's experience with the colonial enterprise in the post-colonial period, written to suggest ways for us as a people to try to reach our aspirations. The reason is because Nkrumah's books are not referred to as holy books. But can we refer to Nkrumah's books as holy books and transcend this space of religion as a place where the holy only exists and step into other spaces, for example, the space that Nkrumah stayed, and try to find something holy about that space? And even find something holy, meaning finding Nkrumah's books to be holy as well, to guide us in the 21st century. This is a question that I would like to pose. Well, as I said, Nkrumah's ideas are still pearls of wisdom for us to use to bring about a certain possession of what Nkrumah referred to as the African personality. The African personality, in my estimation, was what Nkrumah wanted all of us to have. Because when you have that African personality, then you will naturally gravitate to things that will protect the personality, the African personalities that others have around you, including your own. It is aimed at bringing those with this personality together to cause an African renaissance. And I will really talk about what this African personality is, using Nkrumah's description and Nkrumah's ideas, which we need to have. This African personality will bring about dignity and true freedom. So, what is this African personality that I believe if we go back to Nkrumah's books, we will be able to identify and imbibe, that we will be able to educate our students, our youth in the academy, and even outside the walls of the academy. Because as academics, we don't necessarily have to only work within the corridors of the academia, but we can also step out of the corridors and become public intellectuals. So what is this African personality? Something that Nkrumah wanted all of us to have in the post-colonial moment. A personality that is relevant to Africans in the 21st century and beyond. This African personality, according to Kwame Nkrumah, is defined by the cluster of humanistic principles which underlie traditional or pre-colonial Africa. That personality is humanist, not religious. Nkrumah understood many things about religion and how it could really derail this quest for the African personality and all the boons that this African personality could give to the African nation. On religion, he wrote in Conscientism, page 13, and I quote, "Religion is an instrument of bourgeois social reaction." He added, "It is essential to emphasize in the historical condition of Africa that the state must be secular." So Nkrumah did really see that the African personality must be humanist and not one which is religious. because of how he saw religion. Nkrumah's notion of the African personality, which he pointed, he said was, Nkrumah's notion of African personality, which he said was humanist, was therefore to be protected from the polluting influence of religious gimmicks. On religion again, Nkrumah said that religion, or people who are most aggressively religious are the poor people. For in accordance with the Marxist analysis, religion is social, and contemporary religious forms and practices have their main roots in the social depression of workers. So he made it clear that we need to have a new African, an African with this African personality. And this African personality must have certain humanistic principles, certain humanistic values. And so what are these principles? Or what are these unique African cultural ways of affirming human worth and dignity? And showing, of affirming human worth and dignity. The first one is the principle of showing reason. So the person with the African personality must be a person who shows reason. It should also involve the showing of compassion, morality, ethics must be promoted, democracy, which means social justice fundamentally, not the Athenian form of democracy or the Western liberal democracy, but that sacred system that promotes social justice and reverence for life. It must also, this African personality must also be one that is interested in scientific inquiry to understand the universe and solve human problems. Another principle of this humanistic value is naturalism, communalism, the avoidance of divisive parochial loyalties based on race, religion, gender, creed, clans. The promotion of the ethics of striving to work together for the good of humanity. The protection and the enhancement of the earth to preserve it for future generations and to avoid inflicting needless suffering on other species. It also involves the principle of enjoying life here and now, which means that this person must develop his creative talents to the fullest through socialist and communitarian principles of work and happiness. The principle of cultivating moral excellence, cultivating critical thinking to disrupt systems of coloniality. It involves the pursuit of scientific discovery. It involves strong dislike for extreme individualism, unnecessary competitions, and personal enrichment that robs the people, the other people, the masses, from the goodies of the land and their country and Africa as a whole. We have to also add, or I need to also emphasize, that this African personality was one which understood nature not through a theistic framework and not through a non-theistic framework. It should promote social justice and promote non-atheism, but also not promoting unfettered theism. This is because Nkrumah explained that in philosophical materialism, he did talk about matter and pursuing that socialist path and being, by describing himself, a Marxist socialist. He did tell us that it is important for us to understand the nature of matter. And in understanding the nature of matter, we don't have to understand it through an atheistic framework, and we don't also have to understand it through a theistic or a deistic framework. Rather, we have to understand it through what he referred to as philosophical materialism, where matter has different forms, one of which is the intangible and unseen, that which some people refer to as spirit, or the ultimate cause, the ultimate reality, and God. So these humanistic principles are what Nkrumah did want all of us to have in order to become the new Africans who will not go back to sleep, the new Africans who have a new mind. And in fact, he did talk about the new African. He said, there is a new African in the world. And from now on, we need to change our minds. And by changing our minds means changing our psyche and changing our personality. And that personality is the African personality. But this African personality needs to be characterized. We can reify our personality by having these humanistic principles that underlie traditional or pre-colonial Africa. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that there is no need for us to shelve the books of Kwame Nkrumah. Because in the 21st century, definitely, we are still struggling as a people in the dark. We want to find ourselves. We have tried several writings, we've read several books, some called holy books, and so on and so forth. Right, just a few years ago, we had this great thinker who suggested some ways for us, who wrote books. And as Albert Einstein did tell us, he said that one cannot continue to do the same thing all over and all over again, thinking that he or she will have a different result. It's important for us to perhaps pay attention to Kwame Nkrumah's ideas, his books, within which I said points us to one thing, the attainment of the African personality, one which when we have attained will lead us to Pan-Africanism, unity of ourselves, self-love, will lead us to working together because we bear the same personality. It's important for us to go there. And academia has a role to play in this. The question is, will academia be objective and realize that Nkrumah's works do have something to give to us? Will academia realize that right next to us are pearls of wisdom from our own that we can use, and in the spirit of decoloniality, maybe moved a little bit away from the books, the ideas, the philosophies, not to move away from them totally because it's important to have knowledge of them, but to move away from how they are applied wholesalely, lock, stock, and barrel in the African context, and pay attention to some of the African philosophers. In this particular context, Kwame Nkrumah, pay attention to his works because his ideas are still very much alive and relevant to the conditions of the African in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Apologies, my mic was off. Thank you so much, Professor Wache. That was fantastic indeed. Thank you, Elder Akachaba Adesebo as well in the background there. Let me change the icon of the screen, bring myself back on board. That was such an educational presentation. I think it's absolutely shocking. It's unbelievable that, you know, Ghana has such a great thinker and that his works is not being taught in the schools, colleges and universities. To think, you know, that you have a gem like that, and because of intellectual jealousy and because of, you know, the pre-colonial mindset of those within the educational institutions, you know, they're not even allowing his works to be presented so that, you know, there could be, you know, a reasoning and a discussion about, you know, his ideology and ideologies and perspective vis-a-vis, you know, the ones that they want to support. But let me at this stage, please, Professor, please go, allow me to go to the chat, because there's been a lot of conversation whilst you've been presenting that has been happening in the chat. They have been alive with conversation, and it'd be good to bring them in so that, you know, we can hear what they've got to say. You know, I was reading in the chat some comments about, you know, the fact that, you know, they don't want his books to be in the universities and school because they're afraid of what, you know, his thinking will, you know, enlighten the students to become. But let me go over to the chat now. So tag 51104 says, Nkrumah lives, viva Nkrumah. White books are filled with philosophy of revered Black thinkers, but we have not read enough to realize it. Absolutely agree. And it was also said further up in the chat as well that what the white thinkers do in private is they actually study the works of our Black thinkers and apply their philosophies to their own, you know, countries. You know, Tag 5104 is also saying, great job. You know, I am convicted. I need to add Nkrumah to my library. Yes. You know, not only is Nkrumah's works, you know, so invaluable today for Ghana, but for the whole of Africa, you know, because what he was doing, he was transforming Ghana into becoming an industrialized and a modern society. And 50 years on, you know, Africa still isn't there yet. Well, when, you know, back then, Kwame Nkrumah, from the works he was doing and by implementing his ideas, had you know, Ghana on the way, you know, within 5 years. I mean, what he'd accomplished within 5 years, we touched on that yesterday, so I won't go into that again today. But, you know, just imagine where the country would have been today. Let's see what else has been said here. Malcolm X said, yeah, leave your religion at home. I take that to mean keep it personal. It's not it. It just makes some people argue. And then they are distracted from reason when we should really be coming together. Yes, absolutely. So a few comments there on religion. Emmanuel says, what we need in Ghana is a community scholarship away from academia, reading groups in Nkrumahism to counter the academic wall of silence on the works of Nkrumah should be established. Let's go over to Professor and ask his views on that. You know, what are your thoughts on, you know, study groups that are studying Nkrumahism? This person, I think, probably feels that universities are a long way off from embracing Nkrumah's works within the establishment. Do we need to go outside of the formal education system to establish something completely different so Nkrumahism can actually be taught? What say you, please, Professor Wache?
Yes, I think that ideas and knowledge should not only be confined to the corridors and the four walls of the academia. Ideas should also be sent out. And in the African situation, we have to understand that there are many people who do not have access to the school system. And so it is important for us to find ways to, set up study groups. And of course, some young groups are emerging because they are thirsting for knowledge. They are really seeking to have a certain understanding of this enigmatic man, as some people see Kwame Nkrumah. And so they are mushrooming Pan-African groups. Some of them I'm the patron of, and there are other ones around the country that are trying to get people to understand Kwame Nkrumah. But it's not easy because of the de-Nkrumahisation has gone on for a very long time, right? And Nkrumah was demonized. I mean, very, very ugly stuff was said about Nkrumah, were written about Nkrumah, some that are very scary to many young minds, that Nkrumah was not only a dictator, but also a murderer, someone who did not live with any reason, but basically worked with emotions and certain thirst for power. And that Nkrumah, for example, to the point that some people said he was a worshipper of the devil, having gone to Guinea to bring a certain kind of evil spirit. Still people saying that on some programs on YouTube, that he went to bring a certain evil spirit to Ghana to take Ghana's destiny away, saying that evil spirit is called Kankanyame. And they used it against Nkrumah when Nkrumah was overthrown. And this narrative has continued and has gone to the psyche of many young people that they don't even want to, because of their religious stance and positions. They don't want to have anything to do with a person who dabbles or who stays in the company of demons, to the point that some of them, the rumors circulating is that Nkrumah used to have pregnant women gutted and babies taken out their wombs and pounded alive for him to make certain potent medicine, so to speak, to protect himself. So for many people, yes, they have heard Nkrumah's name. Young people, they have heard Nkrumah's name, but because of the stories that were said about Nkrumah, they don't want to have anything to do with him. So it's taken a lot of time to really get many of them to come out of that cage of lies. And it's going on. So yes, this knowledge must first be taken out to re-Nkrumanize the minds of the people, and then get them to understand what the man stood for ideologically. So it is something that must be done. And in fact, Nkrumah realized that the classroom, school training, I don't want to call it education because education is big. Perhaps the classroom miseducation that is still going on. It's not something that will take a short time to remove. And that is why he found alternative spaces of knowledge production for the young people in Ghana by establishing the Ghana Young Pioneer Movement and establishing the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. And I must say that all the parastatal organizations that Nkrumah established to either promote agriculture, to promote any other enterprise, was also an educational institution, because there was certain ideological training that you couldn't go become part of the workers' brigade and not learn, philosophy concerning decolonization. You will definitely learn it. So outside the four walls of the academia, Nkrumah found and in fact championed the establishment of spaces and places using adult education to also promote that idea, that ideology that will lead, the African to become a new African, the African with the African personality. So yes, there is a need for us to start building, these spaces outside of academia. Of course, the Ghana Young Pioneer Movement was banned. The Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute was banned, and all the parastatal organizations that also serve as spaces of learning and education were banned. So we need to really revive and find ways, but there must be a love for Kwame Nkrumah. This must be an Nkrumaphilia, a certain love for Nkrumah, because without that, we will not work. We will only theorize, we'll talk, but we must live Nkrumah. We must, our words, our people may criticize us and say we are crazy, yes, but we must love Nkrumah because yeah, truth is truth, and truth is that which is consistent with fact, and the facts are there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the way forward. I think creating these alternative spaces for learning, for sharing, Kwame Nkrumah's ideas, and at all levels as well. We've got to start from the very young ones before they're indoctrinated, with that mindset that, he was evil and everything else, because that's what they do. That's what the West tends to do. They will demonize our leaders. They demonize all the revolutionary liberating leaders to put people off from wanting to learn more about them. So there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to counter all of that. And Kwame Nkrumah knew that, which is why he was trying to decolonize the education system. But, it needs to happen across Africa and even in the diaspora as well. We've got another comment here that says that, this is from Jomo. He says, I think we need more sessions on the African personality. How can we implement and develop this? I think that's been answered to some extent in terms of creating alternative spaces for learning. But is there anything further that you want to add in particular about the African personality?
Yes, I mean, I think that the African personality is something that we need to have a love for, and we need to, if you want to be an African, then the question is, what makes you an African? So when we ask the question, who is an African? We need to think of finding a good answer to that. And the African is the one with the African personality. And so many people perhaps are walking, skin black, well, with my kind of skin, and they say, like Peter Toy said, it doesn't matter where you come from as long as you're a black man, you're African. That's more of a physical description of the skin color. But there must be something, there must be content. There must be a certain content that makes you African, and there must be a certain attitude. You must exhibit a certain attitude. To add to Nkrumah's, I have always been speaking to some of my students. I tell them that, you see, for me, to be an African, you must first want to be, so you take it. And secondly, you must show two things, apart from having the content, your attitude. Number one is that you must have a certain allegiance. So where is your allegiance? Your allegiance is to this idea, which is called Africa. And it is not connected to just a space, because African now is, or that which is Africa now is global, because you have the African continent and the African diaspora. So a certain allegiance to this idea, which is not confined to space and not even bound within the chains of time. So that is number one, allegiance. Number two, your labor. Where do you channel your labor? Who do you want to give your labor to? Because now labor also involves production. So who do you give your labor to? Do you give your labor to that which is anti that idea which you call Africa, or your labor to that which is pro that idea which you call Africa? So we need to find where we direct our labor. These two things. And these must be taught. Plus Nkrumah's humanistic principles, what he did talk about. And of course, the conscious person will not like to keep all these to him or herself. Once he gets a certain understanding of it, he would like to pass it on, whether in the classroom or whether in the street, whether on the bus, anywhere, to others who do not know. So it is important for all of us once we, for example, this evening having the session, we need to now go try to read more about Nkrumah, try to understand these humanistic principles that undergird traditional or pre-colonial African society, and try to discuss it amongst ourselves and try to grow them within ourselves consciously. That's the only way, because Garvey and Bob Marley reiterated, he said that none but ourselves can free our mind. You know, so you need to take that step to want to become African, to want to be born again, to want to become the new African that Nkrumah talked about. Those who do not want it, it doesn't matter what you will do. You will preach it for hundreds of years, they will not accept it. Those who want it, they will take it. And once they have it, they will definitely find other people who want it. And these people, that critical mass, that critical group of people can do something positive.
Absolutely. I'm going to quickly just bring in a few more comments from the chat, and then Professor will allow you to make some closing remarks, because I realize we have gone way over time, and thank you for hanging in there with us. So S.A. Smith says that it's interesting that they block us from benefiting from the knowledge that comes from one of us while they use it for themselves. He said, you can't make this thing up. Sawaya says, European Union has implemented Nkrumah's ideas on African unity, i.e. one currency, trading, etc., etc. Yes, indeed. My sister African diaspora isn't there yet. We're all in the same boat. Absolutely. Let the African diaspora come together and march forward together. We all need to be marching forward as one, Africans wherever we are in the world. Absolutely. Let's scroll down, see a couple more. White stole from Ma'at and Kemetic dynasties. There are examples of both throughout Western society. Our ignorance is often why we don't recognize the influence. Precisely, you know, do we as a people, that's such an important question. Do we realize how influential we are? Do we realize how creative we are? Do we realize how inventive we are? Do we not realize that the whole world has learned from us, stolen from us, takes from us, and continue to take from us, whilst at the same time demonizing us and demonizing our greats? When are we going to recognize and realize that we are the great ones that they are emulating and wanting to be like, so that we can be ourselves and be the great that we are, and give the due credit and recognition to those greats among us, such as Kwame Nkrumah. Let's go on. Tag says, wow, it's amazing how much overlap exists between the education of young Blacks in the motherland and those of us in the US. White supremacists, we don't call them supremacists, you know, what did you call them? White extremists, white exploiters. Education system has miseducated all of us. Yes, indeed. Let's say, let people say whatever the hell they want. We need alternative spaces, I think that one is saying. And there was a comment that kind of really summed up what the message that I was hoping, and we were hoping, and our elder was hoping, you know, would get across today. And that is a comment from S.A. Let me see if I can find that one. No, it's a comment from Julian first, who said, seriously, I hadn't thought of how bad we've missed out on Nkrumah as a nation. We haven't given him the recognition we should at all. Thanks for the eye-opener, Prof. You know, this is what, you know, this symposium is all about, opening all our eyes, you know, as to the greatness of Kwame Nkrumah, what he stood for, his vision, and how important its relevance until today for Africa, and how we can embrace Nkrumah's works and what he was, you know, what he laid in his foundations and his works for Africa, and that we can still go forward with what he's left with us today to turn Africa around into becoming the industrialized and advanced nation that it has the potential to be. But we have to believe in ourselves and in our abilities and our capability to be able to do that. Let me just ask Professor to leave us with some final words. I want to thank also everybody who's been contributing in the chat as well. Sorry we couldn't bring in all of your comments and opinions, but you know, everyone, please do post some of your comments and opinions in the comment section under the video so that we can get a bit of a conversation going there as well. Let everybody who comes to watch this, before they watch it, know of the importance of Kwame Nkrumah's works, its relevance back then and even until today. You know, let's expose the Western mindset of those in academia who are trying to eliminate Nkrumah's works from the educational institutions. Let's, you know, get a movement going. Let's get, you know, let's have the conversations in our families, in our compounds, in our villages, and in our communities about Nkrumah and his works and what his vision and his mission was for Africa. Let's start wanting and demanding, you know, what Nkrumah wanted for Africa. Let's all want that for the whole of Africa, you know, with unity, one army, you know, one economy. Let's be trading among ourselves, you know, one currency. I want to rise up, Sylvia, as well, for your gift, your cash gift. Thank you so much. Let's go over to Professor for some closing remarks on what has been another awesome day as part of this symposium.
Thank you very much, Sister Shanice, and thank you. A big thank you to all the nobles who have, you know, made time to listen to this conversation. I know that we will continue to think about what we have talked about tonight and discussed, and also what, you know, we listened and talked about yesterday, and what is yet to come, you know, tomorrow and the days that follow, and continue to keep this Nkrumah light burning. We have to understand that, and this is from Sheikh Anta Diop, who tells us that the Western world, or the European world, as one that always talks about a certain fountain of knowledge for its civilization, although we know that it is not true that this fountain that they're going to talk about is not really the original fountain, because the original fountain is ancient Egypt. But they choose to revolve around Rome and Greece as the fountain of their civilization, Western civilization. And they deify and promote their philosophies of their own and use those philosophies to develop, to the point that they even find ways to impose those philosophies of their own on other spaces that are outside their own space. It's important for us to pay attention to the deep thought of our own. In other words, the philosophies of our own, and use those that are applicable to solving our essential needs and our present conditions, using it to improve our present conditions. Kwame Nkrumah is one of the philosophers that we have to pay attention to. He wasn't only a philosopher, he was an intellectual, a producer of knowledge and ideas that are meant to cause positive change in society. That's an intellectual. He wasn't just an academic, but he was an intellectual. And the products of his intellect luckily, they have been put down in print. And it's important for us to look for them, read them, and apply them in our lives. And with like-minded people, we need to come together and use these ideas to shape a path for our communities to trod. I thank you very much. And I'd like to end with a quote again. I'm quoting Kwame Nkrumah, what he said on the 6th of March, and I quote, "We shall no more go back to sleep. From now on, there is a new African in the world. From today, we must change our attitude, our minds, and realize that we are no more a colonial, but a free and independent people." Thank you.
We thank you, Professor De Valera Wache. We thank you. And we also thank our elder Chiaba Adeo Sebo. Thank you so much for the works behind the scenes in pulling all of these wonderful speakers together so that we can hear from some of the great minds and the great thinkers of today about how we should be going forward as a continent and as a people globally. Tomorrow, we've got more great thinkers and great minds. It's going to be a session that's going to be in partnership with the Al-Kabalan Revivalist Movement. They are going to be broadcasting live and direct on the Big G Galaxy Afiwi, the only de-brainwashing station. So we've got Leader Bandaka and his team tomorrow, Monday the 25th of April. And we're going to be going live via YouTube and simultaneously via the Big G Galaxy Afiwi. And we also have Dr. Wendy Akua Adeye, who is a cognitive developmental and research psychologist with a PhD in interdisciplinary studies in human development from the University of Pennsylvania. And she has worked as a consultant in international literacy, education, health, and she is going to be delivering a presentation tomorrow. You don't want to miss that presentation, family. It's going to be also another educational endowment of knowledge that's coming our way. We've also got Ibusuwa Batan, Jojo Hughes, my apologies, Jojo Hughes, Nana Jojo Hughes, who is a member of the Nkrumah's Young Pioneer Movement, whose father oversaw the personal security of Nkrumah when he was at the seat of government. So again, another very insightful and informative session that we're going to be having tomorrow, day 3 of our symposium. So certainly hope that you are all going to be joining us. I also want to support the Rescue Ghana team. Rescue Ghana is an initiative to plant knowledge tree pedagogy at the unit polling station areas in the political constituencies of Ghana, where citizens work and study together to advance and protect the national interest and the African personality. Rescue Ghana is a sponsor of these Nkrumah remembrance discussions. And I've got a number here for the Rescue Ghana. I'm not sure if I can give it out. If I'm able to do so, I will give that out tomorrow. So please do join us tomorrow for day 3 in our series of Kwame Nkrumah event. I have learned so much, and based on the conversations and the discussions in the chat, you know, our family is learning so much as well. So please, before you leave, do give us a thumbs up, like the video, and also comment in the comment section under the video itself, outside of this chat and in the comment section as well. Let's be calling on Ghana and all the African countries to be teaching about Kwame Nkrumah in their curriculum, to be adding it to the curriculum, because, you know, his works are as relevant today and is needed today as it was back then. So family, yeah, we know the forces against us, are plenty and are powerful, but we as Africans, when we come together, we are all powerful and we are almighty as a people. We are creative, we are inventive, we are the original people of the world, we are, as humans, the only humans on this earth. And, on one of my radio stations, I brought evidence to show that we were actually flying aircrafts, to the moon 1.5 billion years ago. We're older than 1.5 billion years, family, but, our minds have been destroyed. 400 years of, undoing the knowledge of the science and the technology and everything that we had. So we've got a lot of work to do. And we're not going to be able to do that looking to the West for guidance, because in reality, they are a new species on the world and they are looking to us for guidance, because the truth is we are the ones with all of the knowledge. Hence why they always are coming to Africa to brain drain and to steal all of our great ones for the West. So let's wake up and realize our greatness. Keep rising, Africans. Stay strong, stay powerful. One love. Sister Shanice out of here, but I will be back with you tomorrow evening, all being well. Thank you to our speakers today, Dr. Amma. Thank you, Dr. Wache. Thank you, Elder Ekachaba Adesebo. Thank